Old black woman owed $50,000 in medical bills. She's shocked to hear that Taylor Swift paid her bills. It was an early spring morning when Mabel Harris, a 72-year-old widow from Greenville, South Carolina, answered a call that would turn her life upside down. The voice on the other end of the line was polite but carried an edge of urgency. "Hello, Mrs. Harris. This is the billing department from Greenville Medical Center. We have been trying to reach you regarding your outstanding balance. You owe $50,000 in medical bills, and it's been overdue for several months now. If we don't hear back from you soon, we'll have to take further action." Mabel, who had been sitting in her kitchen sipping on her warm cup of coffee, froze. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, as if the phone itself had gone silent. $50,000. Her heart sank. She had been battling health problems for the past few years, constant doctor visits, hospital stays, and an unending list of prescriptions. But the thought that she owed this much money was beyond her comprehension. I don't know what to say," Mabel stammered, her voice shaking. "I can barely afford to pay my utilities, let alone that amount. I've been doing my best to keep up with everything." But the voice on the other end softened. "But it didn't help. I understand, Mrs. Harris. But as of now, we have no other option but to move forward with collection procedures. We recommend you get in touch with a financial advisor or seek assistance." As the call ended, Mabel sat there, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. She wasn't sure what to do, where to turn, or how she was going to manage. She'd lived in this small town for over 50 years, and while she wasn't wealthy, she was proud of her independence. But today, that independence seemed to be slipping away, leaving her helpless and alone. Later that afternoon, Mabel sat on the porch of her modest home, staring out over the small garden she had lovingly tended to for decades. She had always been a woman of pride and dignity, never one to ask for help. But this was different. This wasn't just about her health anymore. It was about survival. Her daughter, Terry, had called earlier to check on her. Mabel didn't mention the phone call. She didn't want her daughter to worry. Terry had her own life in Atlanta, a family to care for, and no one wanted to add another burden to that. But what else could Mabel do? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Mabel felt a deep sense of fear. She couldn't let her home go into foreclosure. She couldn't let the hospital take everything she had worked so hard for. But then, just as she was about to give in to despair, another call came in. This time, the number on her phone was unfamiliar. "Hello? Mabel Harris?" The voice on the other end asked, calm and measured. "Yes, this is Mabel. Who's this?" "My name is Caroline. I'm with the charity organization, Heart of the Nation. I've been informed that you're facing some financial difficulties related to medical bills, and I just wanted to let you know that someone has offered to help you." Mabel's brow furrowed. "Help me? I don't understand. I haven't applied for any assistance." Caroline's voice remained steady. "I know, Mabel, but this isn't about an application. This is something different. Someone has stepped forward to pay your entire medical debt." Mabel blinked in disbelief. "What? Someone? Someone wants to pay my bills?" "That's right, Mabel. They've already taken care of it. You no longer owe a penny." Mabel could hardly breathe. Who would do such a thing? Caroline hesitated for a moment before responding. "It's a well-known public figure. Someone who you may have heard of. The person's identity will be kept anonymous for now, but they wanted to help you, Mabel." Mabel sat there, stunned, as the words slowly sunk in. Someone, a stranger, had paid her $50,000 in medical bills. She couldn't understand it. Why her? Why now? And who would do such an incredible thing? But just as quickly as the shock hit her, a flood of questions followed. Could it really be true? Would it last? Could she trust that it wasn't some kind of scam? The mystery swirled in her mind, and she couldn't shake the nagging thought. Why her? Why had someone chosen to help her? Before she could ask another question, Caroline spoke again, this time with a sense of finality. "Mabel, you will receive official confirmation in the mail soon. But rest assured, the payment has already been made. The person who helped you wanted you to know that they simply want to make sure you're okay." Mabel's fingers trembled as she held the phone, her thoughts racing. Who could possibly be behind this kind of kindness? As the call ended and Mabel sat there in a haze of confusion and disbelief, she couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and wonder. But her mind kept returning to one burning question. Who had paid her medical bills? Little did Mabel know, the answer was going to leave her shocked and speechless. She glanced out at the sky, a little brighter now as the first stars began to appear. What was going on? And what would this person want from her, if anything? It was a question that would be answered soon, sooner than she could have ever imagined. Mabel couldn't sleep that night. She tossed and turned in her bed, the mystery swirling in her mind like a storm that wouldn't quiet. The idea that someone had just paid off her $50,000 debt felt like a dream, too good to be true. She'd had spent the last few years pinching pennies, trying to make ends meet after her late husband, Charlie, passed away. She never thought she'd be in this position, not in a million years. The next morning, Mabel woke up late, her body feeling heavy from lack of sleep, but her mind still racing. She went through her morning routine, making herself some oatmeal and sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window at her garden. Her hand shook as she tried to hold the spoon steady. Who was this person? And why would they want to help her? She knew she wasn't famous or rich, just an ordinary woman who had worked hard all her life. It didn't make sense. Around noon, there was a knock on her door. Mabel stood up, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see a young woman standing on the porch, holding an envelope in her hand. "Mrs. Harris?" the woman asked, smiling gently. "Yes, that's me," Mabel said, still unsure of who this was. "I'm Caroline," the woman said, stepping forward. "I was the one who called you yesterday. I just wanted to bring you something in person." Mabel blinked. "Oh, yes, of course. Please come in." Caroline entered the small house, and they sat down at the kitchen table. Mabel's mind was still spinning, but she tried to focus. The woman looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the framed photos of Mabel's family, the simple knickknacks scattered on the shelves. There was a warmth to her presence, and she didn't seem like someone there to cause trouble. "I wanted to make sure you received the confirmation letter," Caroline said, handing over a thick envelope. Mabel took it carefully, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside was a letter, confirming that the balance on her medical bills had been paid in full. The letter was signed by the charity organization, Heart of the Nation, and it included a brief note. "Dear Mrs. Harris, we are pleased to inform you that your medical debt has been fully paid. We understand the strain medical bills can cause, and it is our privilege to assist in your time of need. The payment was made by a generous donor who wishes to remain anonymous. Please know that you are in good hands. If you need any further assistance, do not hesitate to reach out." Mabel blinked at the letter, her hands trembling as she read and reread the words. She looked up at Caroline, who was watching her closely. Who is this person?" Mabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are they doing this?" Caroline's smile faltered just slightly, but she remained composed. "Unfortunately, we can't reveal the identity of the donor. They requested privacy, and we respect that." Mabel felt a lump in her throat. "But, I don't understand. I'm just a nobody. I've never met anyone like that." Caroline leaned forward, her eyes warm but firm. "It's not about who you are, Mrs. Harris. It's about your story. Someone heard about your situation and felt moved to help. Sometimes, people just want to do good in the world, and they choose to help others in unexpected ways. It's a gesture of kindness." Mabel sat there for a long moment, processing the words. She had spent most of her life giving to others, helping neighbors, donating to local charities. But this was something different. To receive help, especially in such an extraordinary way, was something she couldn't quite grasp. "I don't know how to thank them," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to thank anyone, Mrs. Harris," Caroline replied gently. "You just need to know that someone cares." Mabel nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She didn't know what else to say. She had always been proud of her independence. But this act of generosity had left her speechless. It felt like she was living in a story, not her own life. After a long pause, Caroline stood up. "I'll leave you to absorb this, Mrs. Harris. I know it's a lot to take in. But if you ever need anything, or if you want to talk more about what happens next, don't hesitate to contact us. We're here to help." Mabel stood up as well, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, Caroline. You've been so kind." Caroline gave her a warm smile and turned to leave. "Take care, Mrs. Harris. And remember, you're not alone." As Caroline left and the door clicked shut behind her, Mabel stood there for a moment, holding the letter tightly to her chest. The whole thing still felt surreal. She couldn't believe what had just happened. But as she sat back down at the kitchen table, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Without thinking, she answered. "Hello, Mabel." The voice on the other end was warm, familiar, and full of kindness. Yes. Mabel's heart skipped a beat. "This is Taylor Swift." Mabel's hand trembled, and she nearly dropped the phone. "Taylor Swift, the pop star." The voice continued. "I just wanted to let you know that I've taken care of your medical bills. I heard about your story, and I wanted to help. You don't have to thank me, but I hope this gives you some peace of mind." Mabel sat there, completely frozen, not sure if she was hearing things correctly. "Taylor Swift," Mabel repeated, her voice shaky. "Yes, Mabel, it's really me. I just wanted you to know that I care, and I'm glad I could help." Mabel's mind was spinning. Taylor Swift? The famous singer? The one she had seen on TV and heard on the radio? Why would she want to help her, a stranger from a small town? I don't know what to say," Mabel whispered, feeling a mix of shock, gratitude, and disbelief. "You don't have to say anything, Mabel," Taylor said gently. "Just take care of yourself. And know that you're not alone in this world. There are good people out there." As the conversation ended and Mabel slowly lowered the phone from her ear, she felt like she was going to faint. Taylor Swift. The name echoed in her mind like a dream that had somehow come true. But why her? Why had Taylor Swift chosen to help her, of all people? What was the real reason behind this incredible act of kindness? And what would happen next? Would Mabel ever be able to meet this person who had changed her life so dramatically? As the days passed, Mabel found herself grappling with the same question over and over again. Why her? And what did it all mean? The next few days were a blur for Mabel. She went through the motions of her daily routine, but everything felt different. Her life had shifted in a way she couldn't explain. The world seemed both more expansive and smaller at the same time. She had always lived a simple life, focused on her family, her garden, and her community. But now, she was connected to something far beyond that. Her mind kept circling back to the phone call with Taylor Swift. She had heard Taylor's voice, calm and reassuring, as if this act of kindness was just another normal thing she did. But how could that be? Taylor Swift wasn't just a singer. She was a global superstar with millions of fans. Why would someone like that choose to help an elderly woman like Mabel, who had no ties to the entertainment world? Mabel had shared the news with her daughter, Terry, who had been thrilled but equally astonished. "Mom, I can't believe it," Terry had said over the phone. "Taylor Swift? Are you sure it wasn't some kind of joke or scam?" "I thought the same thing, honey," Mabel replied, shaking her head. "But I spoke with her, and she's the one who paid the bills. It's real. I don't know why she did, but it's real." Terry had been quiet for a moment before responding, her voice full of wonder. "This is amazing, Mom. I mean, who gets that kind of help? You've got to write a thank you note or something. Maybe she'll meet you in person one day." Mabel smiled at the thought. The idea of meeting Taylor Swift face to face seemed impossible, yet part of her wanted it to happen. She wanted to understand why Taylor had made such a generous gesture. The next week, Mabel received another letter from Heart of the Nation. It was brief, but it confirmed that the payment was final, and there was no further action required on her part. But this time, there was a note at the bottom. "Dear Mrs. Harris, we would like to invite you to an exclusive event where you might have the opportunity to meet the donor who helped you. This is a private invitation, and we will follow up with the details soon." Mabel stared at the letter, her hands trembling. A chance to meet the person who had changed her life? Was this real, or was she just dreaming again? Her pulse quickened, and she sat down at the kitchen table to collect her thoughts. The invitation came with a date and a location, an event in New York City at a charity gala hosted by Heart of the Nation. There was no mention of Taylor Swift specifically, but the implication was clear. Mabel wasn't sure what to think. The idea of traveling to New York, of attending some high-profile event. It felt like something out of a movie. Could she really go? Was she ready for that? Her decision came later that week. After talking it over with Terry, who was encouraging her to go, Mabel finally agreed. She had to know the truth. She had to meet this person, thank them in person, and understand why they had chosen to help her. It was a week later when Mabel boarded the plane to New York, her nerves running high. She hadn't flown in years, and the thought of navigating a big city made her anxious. But the invitation was too important. Too much of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to pass up. The flight was uneventful, and soon she found herself standing outside a luxurious hotel in Midtown Manhattan, a far cry from her small town in South Carolina. The gala was being held in one of the hotel's grand ballrooms, and Mabel couldn't help but feel out of place as she walked through the grand lobby. She was a country woman at heart, raised on hard work and humility. The polished marble floors and gleaming chandeliers felt like a world apart from her own. When she entered the ballroom, the atmosphere was surreal. The space was filled with glittering people in elegant gowns and sharp tuxedos, mingling and chatting with drinks in hand. The sounds of laughter, jazz music, and clinking glasses filled the air, and Mabel could hardly believe she was a part of it. A host from Heart of the Nation greeted her at the door, leading her inside and explaining that the donor would be arriving soon. Mabel's heart raced. Was this it? Was she really going to meet the person who had helped her? As she stood off to the side, nervously clutching her small clutch bag, she noticed a few familiar faces in the crowd. Celebrities and philanthropists, most of whom she recognized from the media. But her focus was on one thing and one thing only: finding the person who had paid off her debt. It wasn't until later in the evening, after dinner had been served and speeches had been made, that the big moment came. The host approached Mabel with a wide smile. "Mrs. Harris, I'd like to introduce you to your benefactor." Mabel's stomach did a flip. This was it. She held her breath as the host led her to a corner of the ballroom where a figure stood in conversation with a few other guests. The woman's back was to Mabel, but as she turned around, Mabel's breath caught in her throat. There, standing before her in a floor-length red gown, was Taylor Swift, the very same woman who had spoken to Mabel on the phone, the one who had paid off her medical bills. The realization hit Mabel like a wave. "Hello, Mabel," Taylor said with a warm smile, extending her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you in person." Mabel stood frozen for a moment, unable to speak. The woman she had only seen on television was standing right in front of her, her smile bright and genuine. Mabel's heart fluttered, a mix of awe and gratitude washing over her. I can't believe it's really you," Mabel finally said, her voice shaking. "I never imagined." Taylor laughed softly. "I know. It's a bit overwhelming, I'm sure. But I'm glad you could come. I've been following your story, and I just wanted to help in some way. Medical bills can be such a burden, and I thought it was the least I could do." Mabel took a deep breath, still trying to process the fact that she was standing in front of Taylor Swift. "But why me? I don't understand. There are so many people who need help. Why did you choose me?" Taylor's smile softened. "I chose you because I read about your story. I heard about how you've been taking care of your community, your family, your garden. You've spent your whole life giving to others. I just thought, maybe it was time for someone to give back to you." Mabel blinked, feeling a lump in her throat. "But I don't deserve this. There are people who have it worse off than I do. I'm just an old woman." Taylor shook her head gently. "You deserve peace of mind, Mabel. Everyone does. And I just wanted to make sure you got that." Mabel felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "Thank you. I don't know how to express how much this means." Taylor gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to. Just know that I'm glad I could help." The two women stood there for a long moment, words failing both of them as they shared a quiet connection. In that moment, Mabel understood that kindness, at its purest, didn't require any explanation. It simply existed. But even as Mabel stood there, basking in the warmth of Taylor's kindness, a new question formed in her mind. This kindness had changed her life, but what would it change for Taylor? What did she want from this encounter? And what would happen next? Mabel spent the next few days in a haze, trying to process everything that had happened. The gala had been a whirlwind, an experience so surreal that it felt like a dream. But when she awoke each morning, she would reach for the letter from Heart of the Nation, just to make sure it wasn't some incredible fantasy she had imagined. The confirmation that Taylor Swift had indeed paid off her $50,000 in medical debt was still there, still so hard to believe. At first, Mabel had felt like an outsider in that lavish ballroom, but as the evening wore on, Taylor's warmth and sincerity had eased her nervousness. They talked for a while, about simple things: Mabel's childhood in South Carolina, the struggles she faced after her husband's death, and the way she had always worked hard to take care of others. Taylor listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, and never once making Mabel feel like a charity case. It was strange, almost as if they were two old friends catching up after years apart. There were no airs or pretenses, just a conversation between two women from different worlds, united by kindness. Before Mabel left that night, Taylor had given her a private phone number, telling her that if she ever needed anything, she could reach out. Taylor's words had been kind, but they also made Mabel feel a little uncomfortable. She didn't want to be a burden, especially not to someone as busy and famous as Taylor Swift. Still, the more Mabel thought about it, the more she realized she had no idea why Taylor had reached out to her in the first place. There had to be more to this than just a random act of generosity. Why had someone with so much fame, fortune, and influence chosen her, of all people, to help? That question gnawed at her for days, and it was that question that led to the phone call. It came on a rainy Thursday morning, when Mabel was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping on coffee. The phone rang, and she nearly dropped it when she saw the caller ID. Taylor Swift. "Hello," Mabel answered, her voice a little shaky. "Hi, Mabel," Taylor said warmly. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." No, it's fine," Mabel said, still trying to process the fact that Taylor was on the other end of the line. "What's going on?" "I wanted to check in with you," Taylor replied. "See how you're doing after everything. I know it's been a lot to take in, and I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Mabel took a deep breath, her mind racing. I'm fine. Still a little in shock, to be honest. I never imagined anything like this would happen to me. I still can't believe it." "I understand," Taylor said, her voice soft. "It's a lot to process, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by it. But I also want you to know that I did it because I believe in what you've done. You've spent your life giving to others, and it was time for someone to give back to you." Mabel swallowed hard, her eyes welling up. "I just don't know why I was the one chosen for this. I'm just an old woman from a small town. There are so many other people out there who need help." Taylor was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "I know that, and I don't want to downplay anyone else's struggles. But sometimes, Mabel, people choose to help others because they see something in them, something special. I saw that in you. Your kindness, your strength, the way you've always put others before yourself. I wanted to help because I believe you deserve it." Mabel felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "You've certainly changed my life, Taylor. I don't think I can ever repay you for this." "You don't have to," Taylor replied. "You've already repaid it by being the kind of person who's made a difference in the world, and that's all I need to know." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, lighthearted and easy, but Mabel's mind was still racing. Taylor's words were kind, but they didn't answer the question that had been lingering in her heart since the gala. Why me? Before they hung up, Taylor promised to stay in touch. "If you ever need anything, Mabel, don't hesitate to call. And if you want to talk more about all of this, I'm always here." Mabel nodded even though she knew Taylor couldn't see her. "I will, Taylor. I can't thank you enough." And with that, the call ended. Mabel sat in silence for a long time afterward, the phone still in her hand. She wasn't sure how to process what had just happened. It felt like something out of a movie, like one of those stories where the rich, famous philanthropist comes in and saves the day. But this was real. Taylor Swift had paid off her bills, and for reasons Mabel couldn't quite understand, had chosen to reach out to her. That afternoon, Mabel spent hours thinking about everything. Her small house, her garden, her family, all of it felt so ordinary compared to the world Taylor inhabited. And yet, for some reason, Taylor had chosen to step into her life and change it forever. Mabel felt a deep sense of gratitude, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more at play here. Why had Taylor reached out to her in the first place? Was there more to the story than kindness? Had Taylor been following her for a long time? Or was there some other connection Mabel didn't know about? Days passed, and Mabel continued to think about those questions. But it wasn't until the following weekend that she got an unexpected answer. It came in the form of a letter, handwritten and addressed to her in bold, looping handwriting. "Dear Mabel," the letter began, "I know you've been wondering why I chose to help you, and I wanted to explain. The truth is, your story resonated with me deeply. It's something that's close to my heart. I grew up in a small town, just like you. I know what it's like to struggle, to feel like you're not enough, like you don't belong in a world so much bigger than yourself." Mabel's heart skipped a beat. She continued reading. "When I heard about you, I saw so much of myself in your story. You've lived a life of giving, and I wanted to help because I believe in the power of kindness. But more than that, I wanted to help because I understand what it's like to feel invisible, to be just another person in the crowd. I've never wanted fame or wealth to define me. I want to be remembered for the difference I made in the world. And if helping you brings me closer to that goal, then I've done something worthwhile. Mabel's hands were trembling as she read the words. It felt as though Taylor had reached through the letter and touched her soul. I hope you understand now, Mabel. This wasn't just about money. This was about making a connection, showing you that there's more to life than hardship. You don't have to struggle alone, and you're not invisible. Mabel wiped away another tear, her heart full. Take care of yourself, Mabel, and if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm always here. The letter was signed simply, Taylor. Mabel sat there for a long time, the weight of the words sinking in. Taylor wasn't just offering financial help. She was offering a connection, a friendship even. She understood Mabel in a way no one else did. Taylor wasn't just a star to Mabel anymore. She was someone who truly cared. Mabel now had the answer she'd been looking for. The why wasn't about fame or charity. It was about something much deeper, an unspoken bond between two women who had walked different paths but understood the same struggles. As the days passed, Mabel began to feel a new sense of peace settle over her. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. And somewhere, far away in another part of the world, Taylor Swift was doing something even bigger than paying someone's bills. She was showing that kindness, no matter how small or large, could change lives in the most unexpected ways. Mabel spent the next few weeks trying to get back to her normal routine, but things felt different. She couldn't stop thinking about the letter from Taylor, the kindness, and the unexpected bond they had formed. She had always believed in the power of kindness, had lived her life trying to be kind to others. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just a random act of charity. It was personal. Despite the whirlwind of emotions and thoughts that had consumed her, Mabel knew she couldn't keep thinking about it forever. She had a life to live, a garden to tend to, and family to look after. But the truth was, she couldn't help it. Something inside her had shifted, and her once simple life seemed both larger and more fragile than it had before. A few days after the letter arrived, Mabel received another unexpected call. This time, it was from Caroline, the woman who had first contacted her from Heart of the Nation. "Hi, Mrs. Harris," Caroline greeted, her voice cheerful but serious. "I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to check in." "I'm doing fine, thank you, Caroline," Mabel replied. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." Caroline paused for a moment, her tone becoming slightly more formal. "I'm glad to hear that. Actually, there's something I need to tell you. It's important." Mabel sat up straighter, suddenly feeling a sense of unease. "What is it?" "There's a follow-up to the invitation we sent you to the gala," Caroline explained. "We want to make sure you're aware of something very significant. The donor, Taylor Swift, has decided to take things a step further." Mabel's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Well," Caroline continued, "she's planning to host a special charity event in the coming months. It's going to be a big deal, and she's personally invited you to be one of the guest speakers." Mabel blinked, stunned by the sudden news. "A guest speaker? But why me? I'm just a small-town woman. I don't have anything important to say." Caroline chuckled softly. "I think you'll find that your story is more powerful than you realize. Taylor has been sharing your story with her followers and with some of her peers. People have been really moved by what you've gone through, by your resilience. She believes that you could inspire a lot of people." Mabel felt a mixture of surprise and disbelief. She had never imagined that anything she had experienced could inspire anyone, let alone be worthy of a spotlight at such an event. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," Mabel said hesitantly. "I'm not a speaker. I've never been on a stage before." Caroline's voice softened. "I understand your hesitation, Mrs. Harris. But think of it this way. This isn't about being perfect. It's about telling your story, being real. And I believe your story is something that could touch a lot of hearts. You're not alone in this, and Taylor wants to give you a platform to share that." Mabel sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. The thought of speaking in front of a crowd, let alone an event with someone as famous as Taylor Swift, seemed overwhelming. But at the same time, there was a small voice inside her that whispered, "This is your chance to do something bigger." "I'll think about it," Mabel said finally. "It's a lot to take in, but I'll think about it." "Take all the time you need," Caroline said. "But just know that the offer is there, and we're all behind you if you decide to take it." After the call ended, Mabel sat in the silence of her kitchen, her mind racing. The idea of standing up in front of hundreds of people, people who looked up to Taylor, who admired her, was both thrilling and terrifying. But there was also something deeply compelling about it. She had spent her life caring for others, helping people in small ways that no one ever noticed. But now, she had a chance to speak about something larger: the power of kindness, the impact of community, and the importance of never giving up. But before she could make any decisions, another surprise came her way. The next evening, as she was cleaning up after dinner, the doorbell rang. Mabel wasn't expecting anyone. She hesitated before walking to the door and opening it. When she saw who was standing there, her heart skipped a beat. Standing on her porch was none other than Taylor Swift. "Hello, Mabel," Taylor said with a bright smile. She was dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She looked nothing like the glamorous pop star Mabel had seen on TV and in magazines. Instead, she seemed like just another woman, kind, approachable, and down to earth. Mabel's mouth went dry, and she blinked, as if trying to make sure she wasn't dreaming. "Taylor, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to come and speak with you in person," Taylor said. "I know this is a big decision, and I wanted to make sure you felt comfortable with everything. No pressure, just a conversation." Mabel stepped aside, allowing Taylor to enter. "I don't know what to say." Taylor smiled and sat down at the small kitchen table, gesturing for Mabel to join her. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted to be here in person, to let you know how much I believe in you. The offer to speak at the charity event is there if you want it, but only if it feels right to you." Mabel's hands shook slightly as she sat down. "I've been thinking about it," she admitted, "but I don't know. It's all so much. I've never been the center of attention, and the thought of speaking in front of so many people, especially with someone like you." Taylor laughed gently. "I get it. Trust me, I do. I was terrified of public speaking when I started, and I still get nervous. But it's not about being perfect, Mabel. It's about being yourself. People are going to connect with you, not because you're on stage, but because of your heart, your story." Mabel looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together. "I've never thought of my life as a story worth sharing. I just thought I was doing what I had to do. You know, taking care of my family, my neighbors, just doing what I could." Taylor's eyes softened. "And that's exactly why I think your story is worth sharing. So many people can relate to that. You've lived through hard times, but you've always carried on. You've made a difference in small ways. And now you have a chance to do that on a larger scale. Not because you're famous, but because your story can inspire others to keep going too." Mabel felt the tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly. "I don't know if I can do it. I'm not asking you to do it alone," Taylor said gently. "I'll be right there with you, every step of the way. And if you decide not to speak, that's okay too. The most important thing is that you do what feels right for you." Mabel sat quietly, her mind racing, her heart torn between fear and something else. A flicker of hope, a new sense of purpose. She had never imagined that something like this could happen in her life. She had never thought of herself as someone who could inspire others. But now, in the quiet of her kitchen, with Taylor Swift sitting across from her, Mabel wondered if she was ready to take that step. What would it feel like to stand in front of so many people, to speak her truth? Could she do it? Or was she just an ordinary woman who had been given an extraordinary opportunity she wasn't sure she deserved? As the evening wore on, Mabel knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision she made, her life had already changed, and whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength and resilience that had always guided her. The next few days passed by in a blur for Mabel. She spent long hours in her garden, letting the rhythm of pulling weeds and planting new seeds soothe her mind. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the simple pleasures of her daily routine, her thoughts kept drifting back to Taylor, the invitation, and the overwhelming idea of speaking at the charity event. Mabel had always been the quiet type. She was the one who listened to others' stories, gave advice when asked, and helped when she could. But speaking in front of hundreds of strangers, that was a different kind of challenge altogether. She didn't know if she could do it, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward the idea. What if this could be a way to make a real difference? What if she could share her story and help people who were going through the same things she had? She thought about all the hard years, the loss of her husband, the constant struggle to make ends meet, and how, through it all, she had never given up. Maybe, just maybe, Her experience could mean something to someone else. Still, the fear lingered. She spent the next few nights thinking things over, running through the possibilities in her mind. Taylor had made it clear she wasn't expecting Mabel to be a polished speaker. It wasn't about perfection. It was about being real, about sharing what mattered. And yet, Mabel couldn't shake the feeling that she was out of her depth. On a Wednesday afternoon, when the sun hung low in the sky, Mabel received another surprise call. This time, it wasn't Caroline, but a voice she instantly recognized. "Hi, Mabel, it's Taylor." Mabel froze, the phone pressed against her ear. "Taylor, hi. I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know, I'm sorry to bother you again. I just wanted to check in," Taylor said, her voice calm and easy. "How are you feeling about everything?" I'm not sure. It's all been a lot to take in," Mabel replied honestly. "I'd never been to an event like this before. I'd never even spoken in front of a crowd." "I completely understand," Taylor said softly. "I know this is a big step. But here's the thing. This is not about impressing anyone. This is about telling your story. No one knows what you've been through better than you. People will listen because they'll hear the truth in your voice." Mabel felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease a little. Taylor's words were comforting, but the doubts still lingered. She was just an ordinary woman. Was her story really worth sharing? Did she have the right to stand up and speak to a crowd full of people, many of whom had their own struggles, their own challenges? "I don't know," Mabel said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't want to make a fool of myself." "You won't," Taylor assured her, a gentle confidence in her tone. "You have a story that's going to resonate with people. You've lived through some really tough things, and I think that's something people need to hear. You don't have to be a perfect speaker. You just have to be yourself." There was a long pause, and Mabel could almost hear the wheels turning in Taylor's mind. "I want to be upfront with you about something," Taylor said, breaking the silence. "There's something special we're planning for the event, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. But I don't want you to feel pressured. Mabel, this is entirely up to you." Mabel's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? What's happening at the event?" "Well, it's a surprise," Taylor said with a laugh. "But it's something I think you'll really appreciate. It's not just about raising money or awareness. It's about bringing people together, giving them something they can hold on to, something that helps them keep going even when things are tough. You've experienced that firsthand, haven't you?" Mabel nodded slowly, even though she knew Taylor couldn't see her. "Yes, I've been through hard times, but I always try to keep going, to keep living. That's how I was raised. That's exactly why your story is so important," Taylor said. "You've kept going when things weren't easy, and now you have the chance to help others see that they can do the same." Mabel closed her eyes, taking in the weight of what Taylor had said. She'd been through so much in her life: loss, hardship, and sacrifice. But through it all, she had kept moving forward. She had learned to live for others, even when it felt like there was nothing left to give. Maybe she could share that with others. Maybe that could make a difference. "I'll do it," Mabel said, surprising even herself with the decision. "I'll come to the event. I'll speak." Taylor's voice brightened immediately. "Really? That's amazing, Mabel. I knew you'd make the right choice. And don't worry, you're not alone in this. We're going to help you every step of the way. I just don't want to let anyone down," Mabel confessed. "I don't want to disappoint anyone." "You won't," Taylor reassured her. "You're already inspiring people, Mabel. You don't have to do anything other than share your truth. That's enough." Mabel took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and nervous excitement. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt right. This wasn't just about a celebrity helping her with medical bills anymore. This was about something bigger. It was about telling a story that mattered, about showing others that no matter how tough life got, there was always a reason to keep fighting. After the call ended, Mabel felt a strange sense of peace. She had made the decision. She was going to speak at the event. But she also knew this wasn't just a one-time thing. This was a chance to truly live her life in a way that honored the struggles she had been through, the people she had loved, and the lessons she had learned. In the days leading up to the event, Mabel prepared herself the best she could. She practiced what she would say, wrote down the key points she wanted to make, and reminded herself that this wasn't about perfection. It was about being real. But the closer the event got, the more she realized that this was only the beginning. She wasn't just going to share her story once. She was going to make a lasting impact, and somehow, She knew that this moment would open doors she'd never thought possible. Then came the night before the event. Mabel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She was terrified, yes, but she also felt a fire inside her, a burning desire to finally make a difference. She thought about her husband, the family she had cared for, and the way she had always tried to keep going, no matter what. Tomorrow would be the day her life truly changed. The day of the charity event arrived, and Mabel felt like a bundle of nerves wrapped in anticipation. The morning had been filled with an endless series of small tasks. Making sure her dress was pressed, practicing her speech one last time, and trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. The reality of what she had agreed to do was hitting her hard. A public event with Taylor Swift and hundreds of people watching her. Just the thought of it made her palms sweat. By noon, Mabel had arrived at the venue. It was a large, elegant ballroom, filled with glimmering chandeliers and sleek, modern decor. She had never seen anything so extravagant. She had imagined the event would be impressive, but the scale of it was overwhelming. There were caterers preparing the hors d'oeuvres, staff members moving around in tidy uniforms, and guests already trickling in, chatting in hushed tones. The energy in the air was electric, yet Mabel felt as though she were standing at the edge of it all, watching from the outside. She had never belonged to this world. She had always been the one in the background, working quietly behind the scenes. But now, here she was, in the midst of the glittering world of celebrities, philanthropists, and influencers. Mrs. Harris. A familiar voice broke through her thoughts, and Mabel turned to see Caroline rushing toward her with a warm smile. "I'm so glad you made it. Are you feeling okay?" Mabel managed a weak smile. "I think I'm still in shock," she said. "This place, it's so big." Caroline laughed. "It's a little overwhelming at first, but I promise you, once everything starts, it'll feel a lot more manageable. Let me take you to your seat. Taylor's going to want to speak with you before the event starts." Mabel followed Caroline, trying to keep her composure, though her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. As they walked through the venue, Mabel caught glimpses of the other guests, people she had only seen on TV or in magazines. They were all so polished, so well put together, and Mabel suddenly felt out of place, as though she had stepped into a world she didn't belong to. But then, through the crowd, she saw Taylor. The sight of her made Mabel's heart skip a beat. Taylor was standing near the stage, talking to a small group of people. But when she saw Mabel approaching, her face lit up with that same warm, genuine smile that had made Mabel feel at ease the first time they had met. "Mabel," Taylor called out, her voice carrying over the chatter of the room. She waved, and Mabel felt herself blush as she walked toward her. "Hi, Taylor," Mabel said, her voice sounding small in the midst of the grand venue. I'm not sure I'm ready for this." "Don't worry about a thing," Taylor said, giving her a reassuring hug. "I know you'll be amazing. You're here because your story is something people need to hear, not because you need to be perfect." Mabel smiled, but the nerves were still there, simmering just beneath the surface. "I'm trying to convince myself of that," she said, a nervous chuckle escaping her. Taylor laughed, a sound so genuine that it made Mabel feel a little more at ease. "I get it, but remember, you don't have to do this alone. You've got a whole team behind you, and we're all rooting for you." "Thank you," Mabel said, feeling a bit of the weight lift off her shoulders. Taylor's presence was calming in a way that Mabel hadn't expected. "It's just so much bigger than anything I've ever done." "I know," Taylor said with a nod, "but that's why it's so important. You have a chance to speak to people who need to hear your words. So many people are going through hard times, and they'll see you up there and think, if she can do it, so can I. You have no idea how much your story can help someone else." Mabel nodded slowly, trying to absorb Taylor's words. "I just hope I can say something that will make a difference." "You will," Taylor said confidently. "You already have, just by being here." Before Mabel could respond, one of the event coordinators came up to them and gestured toward the side of the room. "Ms. Swift, the program is about to begin. We need to get everyone seated." Taylor gave Mabel one last smile. "Are you ready?" Mabel took a deep breath and nodded. "I guess so." With one last encouraging squeeze of her hand, Taylor led Mabel to her seat at the front of the room, where a small group of other guest speakers were already gathered. As she sat down, Mabel felt a sudden rush of nerves. Her palms were clammy, her heart racing. She glanced around, seeing the faces of people who had the power to make a real impact, philanthropists, activists, and business leaders, many of whom had spent years building empires. And here she was, just a small-town woman who had somehow ended up on the stage alongside them. The room dimmed and a spotlight shone on the podium. The event was about to begin. Taylor took the stage first, and the crowd erupted into applause. She looked radiant, but Mabel could tell from the way she carried herself that she was used to this. Taylor had an air of confidence, but it wasn't the kind that made you feel small. It was the kind of confidence that made you feel like you were standing on equal ground with her. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Taylor said, her voice warm and steady. "This is a very special evening, and I'm so glad you could join us. Tonight is not just about raising money. It's about raising awareness, about coming together to make a real difference in the world. And to do that, we need to hear from people who have lived through the struggles we're trying to help." Mabel's stomach twisted. It was almost time. She had been preparing for this moment. But now that it was here, all the doubts and fears had come rushing back. She glanced at the other guest speakers, most of whom seemed calm and poised, and wondered what she was doing here. But as the evening wore on, something shifted. As Mabel sat through the speeches, she realized that this wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about impressing the audience with big words or flashy gestures. It was about speaking from the heart, sharing her truth, and being real. She saw the way people responded to the speakers who weren't afraid to be vulnerable, to share the hardships they had faced and overcome. Finally, it was her turn. Mabel stood up, her legs shaking slightly, but she straightened her shoulders and walked toward the stage. As she stepped up to the podium, the lights seemed to dim around her, and for a moment, all she could hear was the sound of her own breath. She took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. The words she had practiced didn't come. Instead, what came out was her truth. "Good evening," Mabel began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I'm not used to being up here, in front of so many people. But I'm here because I believe that we all have a story. We all go through hard times, and sometimes it feels like we're alone, that no one understands what we're going through." She paused for a moment, the silence in the room heavy but not oppressive. She could feel the audience listening, waiting. "My husband passed away a few years ago, and I was left to take care of everything. My bills piled up, and I didn't know how I was going to make ends meet. But through it all, I kept going, because there was always someone who needed me. Whether it was my kids, my neighbors, or even strangers, I realized that as long as I kept showing up, I was never truly alone." Her voice wavered slightly as she continued. "And then, something I never expected happened. Someone reached out to me, someone like Taylor Swift. She saw me, saw my story, and decided to do something about it. That was a turning point for me. It showed me that kindness doesn't have to be a big flashy thing. It can be a quiet, everyday act. It can change someone's world in ways we may never fully understand." Mabel paused, allowing the words to sink in. She felt the weight of them, the truth in her own voice. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had ever felt invisible, everyone who had ever struggled and kept going, even when it seemed impossible. "I'm here today not because I've done anything extraordinary, but because there's power in showing up, in being kind, and in helping each other. And if you remember anything from tonight, I hope it's this: you are not alone. There's always someone who cares, even when it feels like the world is against you." The room was silent for a moment, and then, as if on cue, the applause started. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, heartfelt. Mabel felt a surge of emotion as she stepped away from the podium, her heart full. She had done it. She had shared her story, and it had been received with warmth, with understanding. As she walked back to her seat, she saw Taylor in the front row, smiling proudly at her. And in that moment, Mabel knew that this was just the beginning. The applause lingered in Mabel's ears as she returned to her seat, her hands trembling. For a brief moment, she felt like she might collapse from the weight of it all. The emotion, the nerves, the sheer relief that it was finally over. But as she sat down, she realized something. She felt lighter, not just from the applause, but from the honesty in her words. She looked around, seeing faces, strangers, yes, but faces that now felt less like an audience and more like a community. People were nodding, some wiping tears from their eyes. The sincerity in the room was overwhelming, and it was more than she had ever expected. Taylor's voice broke through the hum of the crowd as she walked to the stage to give her own speech. "Thank you, Mabel, for that," she said, her voice carrying with a deep warmth. Your story is exactly why we're all here tonight. It's about showing up, supporting each other, and reminding ourselves that kindness is the thread that ties us all together. Mabel, still seated, looked at the ground, suddenly feeling a little shy under Taylor's praise. The moment had been so personal for her, so raw, that she hadn't expected to hear such recognition. But as she watched Taylor speak, the admiration in the crowd only grew. Taylor wasn't just a celebrity. She was a person. Someone who cared deeply about the causes she supported, about people like Mabel who had been overlooked for so long. For the next hour, the event carried on with speeches, auctions, and performances. Mabel found herself lost in the experience, but her thoughts kept returning to the question of what would happen next. How would her life change after all this? Would things go back to the way they had been? Would the bills still pile up? Would the world still seem as heavy as it had before? But then, something else started to settle in her mind. Hope. Real hope, the kind that comes when you see a glimmer of light after years of walking through darkness. For the first time in years, Mabel felt like she had a real future ahead of her. One that wasn't defined by struggle or by medical bills she couldn't pay. The evening wound down, and Mabel was invited to join the others for dinner. She had expected a simple meal, but what followed was nothing like she imagined. It wasn't just a meal. It was an event in itself, an intimate gathering with people who, like Taylor, had spent their lives not just building careers, but trying to make the world a better place. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time, Mabel felt like she belonged. A man sitting next to her, someone who looked familiar but whom she couldn't quite place, leaned in. Mabel, you did an incredible job tonight. I think you might have just changed a few lives out there. She chuckled nervously. I'm not sure about that. I just told my story. It's nothing extraordinary. No, it's extraordinary, he insisted. You have no idea how many people are sitting in rooms like this who need to hear that someone like you can make it through the toughest times. You've given them hope. Mabel wasn't used to hearing such compliments, and her cheeks flushed a deep shade of pink. She had always been the quiet one, the one who listened, but never spoke up. She had never seen her own story as anything remarkable. Yet here she was, being told she had made an impact. As the night drew to a close, Mabel said her goodbyes, hugged Taylor one more time, and made her way back to her hotel room. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but in the best possible way. She felt full of experiences, full of connections, and, for the first time in a long while, full of possibility. But just as she was about to climb into bed, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Caroline. Hey Mabel, I know it's late, but I wanted to update you on something. The auction tonight raised more than we expected. Your story inspired more people than we could have imagined. There's someone who wants to do something special for you. They're offering to pay off the rest of your medical bills. All of them. It's a huge offer. Mabel, you don't have to worry about a thing. Mabel stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Her heart raced. Was this real? Someone at the event, wanted to pay off the remaining $50,000 in medical bills. The weight of it hit her all at once. Could it be true? She quickly typed a response, her fingers trembling. Who's offering this? Is this a joke? Caroline's reply was almost immediate. It's not a joke. It's someone who saw you tonight and was deeply moved by your story. I'm sure you're not going to believe this, but it's Taylor Swift. She wants to help you. Mabel, she knows how much you've struggled, and she believes you deserve a fresh start. Mabel's hand shook as she read the message. She couldn't believe it. She had been helped by Taylor before, had her bills paid, received the gift that had allowed her to breathe again. But this was something else entirely. Taylor had already given her so much, and now she was going to cover the rest of the medical debt that had been hanging over Mabel's head for so long. Tears welled up in Mabel's eyes. She had no words. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. She'd never imagined something like this could happen to someone like her. But then it dawned on her. This wasn't a dream. This was real. She had been given a chance to start over, a chance to breathe without that constant, crushing weight of debt hanging over her. With shaky hands, she set the phone down and sank onto the bed. She closed her eyes and let the tears fall, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. In the days that followed, the checks arrived. The full amount of her medical bills was paid off, every last dollar. She couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe that someone like Taylor, who had so many people to help, had chosen her. She had never expected something like this, and she had no idea how to repay the kindness. But she promised herself that she would find a way. Taylor had changed her life once again. And this time, Mabel knew that her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next chapter of her life, one filled with purpose, hope, and a renewed sense of freedom, was waiting.